Good afternoon. I'm going to be calling the meeting to order for the Finance and Governance Committee for May 25th. Roll call and posting the agenda, Madam Clerk.
Chair Zaragoza,
Here.
Councilmember Turan,
Here.
Councilmember Basua.
Here.
Mayor, the agenda for the Finance and Governance Committee was posted at City Hall kiosk on Thursday, May 20th, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we salute our flag, I'd like to share that I'd like to have a moment of silence for my sister-in-law, Elena Zaragoza, who passed away this past Friday. Elena was married to my brother, Art Zaragoza, and services will be held this coming Tuesday, June 1 in Madera, California, up north. And for that reasons, I will not be able to participate for that meeting. However, Mayor Pro Tem is going to be available to chair that meeting that day. Also, I'd like to take a moment of silence for all the men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our nation this coming Memorial Day, May 31, 2021. So at this time, can please join me to salute our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Our next item on the agenda is we have one public speaker for items that are on the agenda, and that's Douglas Partello. Douglas, you got 3 minutes.
Mayor, Mr. Portillo is not available at this time.
Okay, so item C, we have no consent agenda items at this time. So our next, I'm sorry, yes, we have I'm sorry, we do have, our minutes would be this approval of the minutes, and that the recommendation that the Finance and Governance Committee approve the minutes of the regular meetings of January 26, 2021. And this is part of the consent. Do we have a motion, council members?
I'll
Motion
motion to approve.
Okay,
And I will second.
okay, motion by Councilwoman Basua and second by Councilmember Turan.
And just for a quick discussion, Mayor,
Yes, sir.
thank you. I did check with the city attorney's office. These minutes are from a January meeting, which is prior to my appointment. However, it was confirmed that we are not voting on the substance or content of the minutes, but rather that the minutes can move forward for approval. And so I just wanted to make that clear. I did check on that, and I will be voting on this item. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. Roll call.
Councilmember Basua,
Aye.
Councilmember Turan,
Yes.
Chair Zaragoza.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Our next item is the City Manager Department. This is subject to Whistleblower Hotline Services Agreement Extension. And the recommendation is that the Finance and Governance Committee recommend to the City Council approval of the authorize the mayor to execute a third amendment to the agreement number A7986 with Price Page and Company to add 3 years and amend the rates to the Whistleblower Hotline Services. And this was again viewed and required by Measure M, and it was a pre-recorded presentation. Council members, any concerns or questions on this item?
Mayor, sorry to interject. This is Sherry Klima, the Deputy City Manager. I just wanted to let you know you also have on the line Henry Ohm from Price Page, so he can also answer some questions if you all have any.
Okay. Council members, any questions from Henry at all? Council member Tehran?
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to take a moment while we're on this item, if Ms. Klima or Mr. Ohm would be willing to explain for the benefit of the public just what this item entails and then what the program is. if that's possible.
Ms. Klima? Mhm.
Sure, Councilmember Tehran, thank you. So the Whistleblower Hotline is a hotline that is available by email, phone, or mail for members of the public or for employees to provide allegations of fraud or other fiscal concerns that they may have for the city. And then this is an independent entity that will then look into those allegations and make a determination of whether there is some sort of legitimate concern.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and Sherry, my understanding is that not only is just for employees, but other agencies or anything that they know that's a violation or fraud of governmental monies. And my understanding is that the tops on this is about $6,250. Is that correct? Mhm. Sherry?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'd like to make a motion to approve this item.
I will second that.
Okay, first by Mayor Zaragoza, second by Councilwoman Basua. Roll call.
Councilmember Tehran,
Yes.
Chair Zaragoza,
Yes.
Councilmember Basua.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you. Our next item is a public works item, this fiscal year 2021-22 Landscape Maintenance District initiation of proceedings and declaration of intention to levy and collect assessment and scheduling of a public hearing. And recommendation is the Finance and Governance Committee recommend to the City Council and acting as legislative body of the City Council Landscape Maintenance District, LMDs. Number one, adopt a resolution initiating proceedings for the annual levy and collection of assessments for fiscal year 2021-22 within the city's LMDs. And two, adopt a resolution declaring the intention to levy and collect assessment for fiscal year 2021-22 within the city's LMDs pursuant to the Landscaping Lighting Act of 1972. And again, this was viewed and required by Measure M. It's a pre-recording presentation. And I have 5 speakers for this item. And we'll start off with the first speaker is Douglas Partello, followed by Naomi. Douglas Partello.
Mr. Partello? Yes.
Yeah, he was there for.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening, committee chair, committee, staff, and public. After reading the engineer's report, one of the questions I have for the committee is the proposed $149,317 from the general fund, account 1001-711-7001 for utility overage. Is that legal to pay from the general fund taxes into special districts the cost of utility overage? And how is that determined what to take from the general fund and to which district to give it to? The other key question is the legality of using such a large portion of funds from certain LMDs to fund the Renew Oxnard program with NBS Civic Might. The explanation is given that it's okay because the Landscaping Lighting Act of 1972 allows for incidental expenses. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the legal definition of incidental expenses, but I understand it to mean very minor expenses, certainly not in the tens or hundreds of thousands from a total revenue stream of 1.6 million. Where can we find the budget line item for the cost of the funding for NBS for the Renew Oxnard program? And what exactly is the line item for on-call services contingency reserves? For this fiscal year 21-22, how much is NBS Renew Oxnard in the LMD budget? And would you consider that amount incidental expense? For the committee members, did you read the engineer's report in its entirety? Did you find anything that raised questions in your mind? I certainly found plenty. There is some large dollar amount general fund offsets for utilities in some of the LMDs while others not? Why do certain LMDs gain offsets and others little or none? This seems inequitable at best. One glaring example is LMD number 39, DR Horton. $20,415 in utilities in the direct expenses and a general fund offset of $14,428. The actual cost to property owners is then $527 after the offset. I'm not sure how the taxpayers of Oxnard feel about subsidizing the
seconds.
utilities for certain special districts where the property owners divide the benefit. So I'm hopeful that everyone on the committee understands all the particulars to send the recommendation of staff to the City Council for this item. If not, perhaps more time may be necessary to be fully informed and make any necessary corrections or adjustments so this won't come back and bite the taxpayers like the IUF decisions of the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Partello. Next speaker is Naomi, followed by Ray Littell. Naomi, 3 minutes.
Naomi is not available to speak, Mayor.
Okay, Ray Platel, followed by Alicia Purcell. Ray Platel.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, sir. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Committee chair, committee members, and the public, good evening. Relative to all the LMDs, for the line item on-call services contingency reserves, I have 3 questions. 1, who provides these on-call services? 2, on-call services consists of what? And 3, each element of this account should be broken out as such. For example, how much for on-call services, how much for a contingency, how much for reserves. And relative to my specific LMD number 28, this specific account increased by 134%. This is more than double. How can you explain this? And reserves are part of this account, yet the reserves in this account do not seem to correlate to the reserve funding levels listing in the 2021-2022 fund balance projections. Therefore, what is the difference between these 2 reserves? And still relative to all LMDs, 1, how is the surplus funds or credits computed determined as found on the 2021-2022 fund balance projections? 2, outside administration services, non-city staff. Who is this and what are they doing in addition to what city staff is supposed to do? And 3, for the county collection fee, I cannot use the listed formula to derive the same values as listed in the LMD budgets. So how do you compute this? Relative to the city direct staff overhead, in only 2 of the instances that I examined, the amounts listed for this account increased 39.3% and 67%. That's for LMDs 28 and 46 respectively, as compared to last year's value. This increase is very high. Can you explain this? And speaking of overhead, where is the associated direct labor for city staff? How can you generate city staff overhead without city staff direct labor? The only direct labor I see is contracted labor costs, not city staff. The contractor's direct labor hours will generate their own overhead for their own use, like contractor offices, equipment, supplies, etc. And finally, for 2021-2022, how are you paying NBS? For example, from which account number or numbers, and which LMDs are paying for them? Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Alicia Purcell, followed by Aaron Starr.
Miss Alicia Purcell.
Okay, I'm here.
Yes, hi. Thank you. You have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. I've publicly objected to it twice before, and I'm going to repeat myself again here that I don't believe it's legal under the Landscape and Lighting Act of 1972 to charge the LMDs for the Renew Oxnard program, though it seems it will continue in the next fiscal year. In my own LMD, for each of the last 2 years, we've been assessed 5 digits for supposedly replacing benches and trash cans, but they haven't been replaced, nor do I really think they need to be. It seems the actual expenditures don't match what was budgeted, and we're sitting on a $250,000 fund balance. But we do have trees that are tilted at a 45-degree angle with the ground, and one that completely fell a long time ago that hasn't been touched by the contractors. On another subject, in the engineer's report, after the pages with the budgets for each individual LMD, there's another page that has totals for all of them combined. And I'm looking at the 4 lines of those administrative expenses, and I haven't been able to deduce the formula for how those are allocated among the various LMDs. I've tried to find the pattern, but I haven't yet found a formula that matches. So maybe someone on staff or Pablo could pick one of them and demonstrate how that calculation is done for those 4 categories of administrative costs. There seems to be a pattern of very large increases this year in the budget line titled on-call services / contingency / reserves. And there also seems to be a matching pattern that the same LMDs, which are being charged a lot for building their reserves, the same districts are having large surplus funds applied as a credit. And this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Why do you increase to charge the reserves at the same time you're applying credits to burn off the reserves? It seems like they just cancel each other out. So I don't see the point. Though many of the LMDs have large increases in that reserves category, there's one anomaly that really, really sticks out. LMD number 42 has $100,000 in the line item in that line item for next year. Their fund balance is already over $700,000, which is an outrageous amount already. So why in the world are they being charged for more reserves in the next
40
year?
seconds.
This just doesn't seem right. And then LMD number 39 is being charged close to $46,000 for water, which is way out of line with water costs in other LMDs. And others have been told that it's for the park, but a lot of city neighborhoods have parks and aren't charged $46,000 a year. Why are these residents burdened with such high costs when other park neighborhoods are not? There are several other LMDs very close to the park, but LMD 39 is carrying a disproportionate cost from it. That does seem in my comments. I'll let the city clerk know that Aaron Starr is not available to speak right now.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, and also just for, so Aaron Starr is not available. So anyway, just for the speakers, again, this item is going to be recommended to the entire city council. It's a pre-recorded presentation, and any additional information that is needed, you can call Craig Beck at 805-385-8055. Thank you so much. Mr. City Manager, City Attorney, any concerns? No? We're good? Okay. Council members, any questions, concerns, or items for additional? Again, this is pre-recorded item. It's going to be going, the recommendation is to adopt again the resolution for the initial proceedings for the annual levy and collection of assessments for the fiscal year 2021 within the city LMDs. And 2, again, adoption of resolution declaring the intent or the intention to levy and collect assessments for fiscal 2021-22 within the city LMDs pursuant to landscape lighting of Act 1972. So, council members, any concerns? Councilmember Turan?
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple things I was writing down. I realized there were a number of questions that were brought up by the 3 speakers. I'm not sure if staff's going to be able to address some of those. But one question I have before we get to that is, because Measure M prevents this presentation from being shown to the public tonight, they are required to see it ahead of time. 21 viewers have seen it on the YouTube channel. I'm hoping that we can have staff just briefly explain without violating Measure M what it is we have in front of us, and also just briefly what an LMD is and how it works, if you can succinctly put that into something that's digestible for the public watching tonight, keeping in mind that for me, myself, I had to teach this to myself because I live in a wonderful neighborhood, but it was built before we had LMDs, and all the neighborhoods around me, with the exception of Cabrillo, don't have LMDs. And so I think it'd be a really great opportunity for the public to get a sense for what that is, especially those who live in older neighborhoods like myself. So those are my 2 initial questions. Just if we can explain the item in front of us about the assessments, and then briefly what an LMD is.
And that's a good question because this is an annual item too, you know, and there's been more concern with LMDs this year, but I'm not sure if Steve or Craig, who's going to answer that question for the council member.
I can
Steve?
start off this conversation, and then we also have Amanda Welker with MBS, who's available to chime in as well, along with our interim director, Craig Beck. So a quick history on LMDs. LMDs stand for Landscape Maintenance Assessment Districts. And what it is when developers come into a city and they want to develop a community, they go into negotiations with the city. And part of that negotiations is what amenities or improvements are going to be part of that development and what that development is going to pay for. So they enter into an agreement with the city that the landscape improvements that are part of this district or any park or any other improvement that's approved as part of the formation documents are the responsibility of the residents who live within that community. So, and this is paid through their annual assessments, which goes through the county tax roll. So after these communities are formed and the residents become responsible for the ongoing maintenance of the district as part of the formation documents, the assessments would be able to increase to keep in pace with the cost of living expenses. However, back in the 90s, the state of California passed Proposition 218, which took out the inflator for these LMDs. And so they were no longer able to assess anymore unless they had an inflator built into their LMD to keep up with the market. So this became evident once we got through the 90s and into the 2000s. We started seeing districts who were max assessed and they could no longer continue to maintain their improvements. And this is just cost of living increases, cost of business, what it cost to maintain a landscape back in the 90s costs a lot less than what it takes to maintain a landscape in the 2020s. Seeing that Prop 218 capped the ability for many of these LMDs to assess themselves and many of them getting max assessed, we had to go into creating levels of service. And so the levels of service determine this community, say it can't maintain its landscape on a weekly basis, but it can maintain its landscape on a monthly basis. So that takes it to that level of service. And when they exhaust that level, then they go to quarterly. So that's why we get areas like Maintenance Assessment District 4 that they're only able to maintain their landscapes on a quarterly basis. So I don't know what much more to say than that's the current situation. One thing that I can point out as well is that the city did, as an opportunity to alleviate some of this, we went back and reassessed these communities and found that communities that were responsible for the corridors along the major arterial streets that actually served a general benefit. So to help save the cost to these assessment districts, the city moved those corridor landscapes into general benefit because they serve the general population and not those communities specifically.
Thank you,
Thank
Steve.
you.
Amanda, do you have any additional, you want to add anything for the council member, Amanda?
No, I'm impressed with Steve's response, and I think he covered anything, but if there's any additional questions to tag on, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you. Thank you both. Just some quick things on that. So what Mr. Howlett had just mentioned about the general benefits areas on the arterial roads. So it sounds like, and I'm not wanting to go off the subject here, is just to elaborate a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we approved at the recent council meeting about looking at our parkways and medians around the city to invest more in those, it sounds like those are what we're talking about with those exterior portions of landscaping. Is that correct, Mr. Howlett?
Also, by the way, the city manager would like to jump after Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. I'm sure the city manager will be able to expand on this further, but yes, as part of the recent approvals by council, we do intend to step up the maintenance. When these general benefit areas were moved out of these special districts and put in under the city's control, of course, because of the city's financial difficulties that they were having in recent years, these landscapes suffered as a part of it. So now council has given the commitment that we're going to start making improvements to these perimeter landscapes that are in the arterial streets.
That was enhanced item that we passed. City manager?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So between our three public speakers, there were about a dozen or more specific, very specific questions, and we will provide answers to those when this moves to council. Specific questions about how is the funding formula, what's the overhead, what's the on-call. We'll provide answers to all those when this is before council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just had one more thing, Mr. Mayor, if I can.
Okay.
Thank you. So the last questions I have here is one thing that you'd mentioned, Mr. Howlett, around the escalator and Prop 218 passing. If, for example, we had an LMD that was paying, around $88 a year back in the 1980s, that probably might have been sufficient for the cost of labor and the cost of providing those services back in 1988 or so, right? However, here we are in 2021. If they're still paying $88 a year, it doesn't, in my head, equate to being enough to make that work. If we just, to keep the math simple, if you made $8 an hour in 1988, you're probably doing okay. But if you're making $8 an hour, still the same $8 an hour at the same job in 2021, it's probably not going to go as far. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Those are my questions, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. The question that I have, Stephen, probably didn't happen back in the couple of 20 years ago, but most of those LMDs, or when people purchase a piece of property, there's a Department of Real Estate disclosures. And I know when I bought my property over where I live, we have one, and I had a disclosure that's probably about 4 or 5 inches thick. And that it talks about LMDs, it talks about maintenance, and talks about, are you willing to pay X, Y, and Z, and so forth. So my question is, how many of those LMDs have disclosures from real estate agents when they purchase that property, and the people that have those disclosures, I really tell them to ask them to please read those disclosures, and most likely the cost of maintaining the LMDs are in those disclosure statements, which I think are important for all of us to understand. So I'm not sure, Steve, how many of those, or maybe Amanda, how many of those in your studies have disclosures when they bought those properties, that shared the responsibility with them of paying for the LMDs at the time. Do you know of any? Maybe the older tracks didn't have those disclosures, but maybe the newer ones do.
Yeah, I can answer that. I would have to look at the codes to see if there's a specific date that became a requirement, but I can tell you that all title companies are required to disclose all special assessments and special taxes. That would be an issue if someone had said they weren't aware of a special assessment. They would need to go to their title company, but that's something that's mandatory before purchasing a home.
And that's right. And that's important, people to understand, when they do buy a piece of property, there's conditions and there's disclosures and items that they sign and should be aware of. And the realtor and also the title company should make them aware of that too. But thank you for that. Council members, any other questions on this item? Again, this is going to the entire board. We're just recommending again, as I mentioned before, that the initial proceedings, and then of course that to levy and collect assessments, and it's going to before the city council. I'll make a motion to approve. Go ahead.
I will second then.
Motion by Zaragoza, second by Turan. Roll call.
Councilmember Turan,
Yes.
Councilmember Basua,
Yes.
Chair Zaragoza.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you. Our next item is another item, Public Works Department, this fiscal year 2021-22 special tax levy for community facility districts, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and also 2000-3. The recommendations of the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that the City Council, acting as a legislative body for the community facility district CFDs, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2000-3. 1, adopt a resolution setting special tax rates CFD number 1, Westport and Mandalay Bay for fiscal year 2021-22. Number 2, adopt a resolution setting a special tax rate with CFD number 2, Westport and Mandalay Bay for fiscal year 21-22. And number 3, adopt a resolution setting a special rate with CFD number 3, Seabridge and Mandalay Bay for fiscal year 21-22. 4, adopt a resolution setting a special rate within CFD number 4, Seabridge and Mandalay Bay for fiscal year 21-22. 5, adopt a resolution setting a special rate within CFD number 5, River Park for fiscal year 2021-22. 6, adopt a resolution setting a special rate within CFD number 2000-3, Oxnard Boulevard / Highway 101 interchange for fiscal year 21-22. And 7, authorize a special district manager or designee to execute an agreement for the billing of a direct assessment within the Ventura County Auditor Controller to provide the service of placement of direct assessments on the Ventura County's secure tax roll. And again, this was required under Measure M, a pre-recorded presentation. And council members, this is CFDs again, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2000-3. Any questions or concerns on this CFD item? Councilmember Turan.
Thank you, Mayor.
Mm-hmm.
And similar to the previous item, considering that 17 people, 3 of them in this meeting right now have seen the video that was pre-recorded, can we just briefly explain what a CFD is for the public and what we're looking at on this item for us ahead of us or right in front of us? Thank you.
And also, my understanding that, of course, this is no cost to the city, it's all within the CFD. So Steve, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. So a community facilities district is very similar to a landscape maintenance district in that property owners, when they move, as part of the formation of the community, it was negotiated with the city of what improvements would be paid for by the residents of that community. However, where CFD is different than an LMD is the fact that the inflators are built in and the community can determine what level of service they want. Take, for example, Westport, they requested daily landscape maintenance, whereas River Park has weekly maintenance. So each community kind of determines what their level of service is, and then the assessments are figured based on what the community's requests are.
Okay, and again, Steve, those, I'm sure that the disclosures are there, right? Because I've seen them. I've seen those disclosures in CFDs, and that's extremely important that the purchasers of the properties understand that there is a CFD, which is extremely important. Councilmember Turan, my apologies. Any other questions?
No, thank you for the explanation, Mr. Howlett. Well, actually, one really quick thing. Thank you for comparing and contrasting the LMDs and the CFDs. Is there any way, I mean, I'm seeing what we have here in front of us, and considering we're on the subject of CFDs and what's before us to send to council for these particular districts, let's say that another neighborhood saw this item and said, that's interesting. I want a CFD. I don't want a CFD. Can the city force a neighborhood to form a CFD? Or what if neighborhoods wanted to do one? Would they be allowed to? Like, what does that even look like?
No, that is strictly up to the communities and the governing bodies of those communities. So this goes into the Renew Oxnard program. those communities that had the reserves that could afford it, if they chose to engage with the Renew Oxnard, they were given that opportunity. However, there were communities that could not afford it, but they weren't the CFDs. Obviously, they were the LMDs. But staff did have a meeting with some of these communities directly without using NBS
And
to talk about their options of what they can
Steve,
do.
my understanding of CFD then, if, for example, the councilman said if a neighborhood wants to go into a CFD, that requires a vote of either the landlords or the renters. And my understanding is under the landlords is 50% and under the renters is about 2/3. Is my understanding under CFD. If I'm right, wrong, or indifferent here. Is that correct, Steve?
I believe you're correct.
Okay.
Great, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay, council members, what's a pleasure of this item? This again this is a recommendation of the Finance and Governance Committee recommend that the council acting as legislative body for the Community Facilities District 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in 2003, that we send that over to the recommend to the city council for the
I
sign.
will move the recommended action, Mayor.
Okay, moved by Basua
And I will second.
and second by Councilmember Turan. Roll call.
Chair Zaragoza,
Yes.
Councilmember Basua,
Aye.
Councilmember Turan.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes 3-0.
Thank you, committee members. Our next item is item E. Is any items for future agendas that you might want to bring to the governance and the Finance and Governance Committee? Okay, if none, then we are adjourned. And we'll be back for the 6:45 with the Community Service and Public Works and Housing Development at 6:45. Thank you so much, Councilmember.